Hey there, Suzi here. Today's episode of the Content Sales Podcast is brought to you by the Profitable Business Workshop for coaches and consultants. It's a new workshop we've created to help business owners like you reach your money goals and take control of your business finances, even if you're not a numbers person. You can join me at this brand new workshop on Tuesday, the 30th of July. In this workshop, I'll personally guide you through the exact process I've used to help thousands of business owners achieve their revenue goals, increase their profits, and feel more in control of their money. This method has been a huge hit for our members who've taken the workshop, so I thought I'd let you get access to this incredible resource too. As of this recording, we do have spots available for the 30th of July, so head over to profitablebusinessworkshop.com now. That's profitablebusinessworkshop.com. You're listening to the Content Sales Podcast, a show all about how to create content to attract, convert, and keep your ideal clients. Welcome to episode 241. I'm Suzi Dafnis, and my co-host Michelle Falzon is here with me. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Hey, Suzi. I'm doing really well, thank you. I'm looking forward to speaking with you today and to chatting with our special guest who also happens to be one of our wonderful masterminders.
Which is a double bonus because we love having a good guest, and when we can feature one of our incredible and talented masterminders, all the better. So it's an extra special day because many of our longtime listeners know that Michelle and I host a mastermind for women business owners. In fact, as this episode is going to air, we will have just introduced some new women into our mastermind. And our guest today, as Michelle mentioned, is one of our masterminders.
That's right. We heard her mention this topic in a panel she was on at one of our 2-day in-person meetings. We do really try and facilitate our masterminders sharing with each other all of their brilliance. And both of us knew as soon as she mentioned this that we wanted to dig into this further with her.
Yes, our ears really pricked up with the mention of the particular phrase that she used, which was plain language. And she's really got a particular take on how to be effective using straightforward, jargon-free, plain speaking. And we knew that we wanted to hear more because so often we can get into our own jargon and really alienate our customers. So we've invited the wonderful Susan Bell of Susan Bell Research onto the show to discuss this concept. Now, before we get her on the line, we told you she's a masterminder, but let me tell you a little bit about what she does. So her business is Susan Bell Research. They provide communication research and content testing services to business and government, specializing in the older retiree age group, which we love. Michelle and I love a niche. Now, her business has been going since 1994, so she's a well-established business owner. And while she began with a general market social research agency, she's really been zoning in on two specialties: testing written content and research with people over 55. So let's go ahead and get her on the line.
Hey, Sue, welcome to the Content Sales Podcast. It's great to have you here.
It's lovely to be here.
We are so excited to be talking about the power of plain language. But what does that actually mean? Can you explain what plain language is and why is it important in our communication?
I most definitely can explain that. I will take any opportunity I'm given to talk about plain language because it's a really simple way of learning to write clearly so our readers understand us. So in terms of what it is, it's two things. First of all, it's using simpler language in our writing, which is what people tend to think of when they think about plain language. But it's actually a lot more than that. It's also about the layout and design of our writing and of our content. And one of the things that we see, especially actually, is the order of the information, the order in which we the order in which we present our information. So those two things are the core of plain language. So I can expand on that a little bit because I'm saying that last year, the International Standards Association worked with the plain language community and they came out with a standard for plain language. And it has 4 elements to it. And they are as follows. The first is get, which is that the reader, and it's always about the reader gets the information at the time they need it. The second one is find. So you find the information that you need as a reader. The third one is that you understand what you found. And the fourth is that you use what you've understood. Now, I do have a download that I've prepared, so that framework and some tips on how to use the framework in that download.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we'll circle back to that before we finish up today so that we can give our listeners an opportunity to get that from you. But I love that. Get, find, understand, and use is what did I get that right? Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
We've kicked off with some very clear frameworks already. You are walking your talk around this plain language idea. And I want to talk a little bit about like how we might find our market's plain language. How can somebody who's listening right now, they're in business, how can they identify the plain language that resonates with their specific target market?
The thing that I always say is if you want your users to understand you, you need to understand your users. And so this does depend on how large a business you are, how large your operation is. We work quite a lot with large organizations like insurance companies and superannuation companies. And for them, we do user testing. So we help them understand their users. And what we do is we present some of their letters and statements and things like that to users to find out what users do with that information. Can they get what they want? Can they find it? Can they understand it? And can they use it? And then they do a plain language rewrite and we test it again. And that's enormously helpful because they understand not only more about their users, but understand what it is that users want to get from whatever it is their written content that they've been talking about. And what we see often is that the difference between the two, so the first stage where we test existing content and the plain language testing stage, is the difference is in how much the person reads of what they've been given. So often if something's been written in a very kind of traditional or formal, legalistic or technical way, people will, I say they hop, skip and jump their way through documents like that. So they'll hop in where they want to start. They'll skip over something that looks long and lengthy and dull. And as soon as it stops appearing to be relevant, they jump out. So they just hop, skip and jump their way out. They just don't read all of it. But what we find when we do plain language testing, so it's a document written by someone who can write in plain language and we test it. No one reads everything. I'm not going to say people read everything. They don't, but they do read more of it. So that is probably the biggest difference. And I do have an example I thought I might share with you, which is actually a personal example because it happened to me. What happened a few weeks ago was that I received an email from my car insurer. And I pay monthly, and that it was something about important information in the subject line. So I thought, oh, okay, it's going to be about my renewal and the premium. Has it gone up? Clicked on the link. And what I discovered then was a 6-page letter that started. I'm reading this to you now. Hi, Susan. As part of our continued commitment to improving your financial well-being. Now, I pretty much stopped at that point because I hadn't woken up that morning wanting to know if they were committed to my financial well-being. I hadn't clicked on the link wanting to know if they were committed to my financial well-being. I wanted to know about my premium. And so that's the first of the elements. I was not getting what I wanted. It wasn't relevant to me. So I just jumped. I bailed. Now, the sting in the particular tale of this story is that a couple of weeks later, they sent me another email which had a slightly more useful subject line, urgent.
Okay.
Urgent. So I thought, okay, I'll have another go at this. And what I discovered in this second communication was that not only had they inexplicably converted me from monthly to annual, they doubled my premium.
Oh, that was urgent.
That was urgent. That was the information I needed to get at the beginning. But because what they'd done was they'd started with waffle, I had just jumped out of the document and didn't get it. But if they'd written it in plain language, they would have told me what I needed at the outset. That's the difference.
I love these examples because we can probably all, as we're listening, relate to that, where somebody's come in with a whole bunch of irrelevant stuff and then buried the really important thing they needed to give us, or that we needed to get, to use your language. If we're not a big insurance company, like many of our listeners are smaller business owners, and they may be like, what's the equivalent of user testing, or what's something a small business owner could do to start to understand some of these dynamics, even if they can't do a big, I know you help people with fantastic user testing and some deep kind of research and analysis. What tips might you have for us just to get a bit of a sense of this?
There are lots of things that a small organization can do. So one of the first things to do, what I do, is I call it a plain language edit. Because sometimes when you're writing, really all you want to do is get your ideas down. You don't want to feel too constrained, So if you can use the framework that's in the download, with various tips about what to do. And they include things like using headings, using dot points, checking how long your sentences are, those kinds of things. So do it afterwards. I did this recently. I'd written this wonderful blog post with this beautifully fine crafted first paragraph, and I did a plain language edit and it had to go. It was not getting to the point. So I think that's one of the first things. The second thing is, and I might come back to this later, it's really invaluable to read out your own work. What happens, one of the things you'll notice if you read out your own work, if you've written something which is too long for people's brains to process, you will take a breath, or you will several breaths as you go through. So be reading as you go through. And those are the points at which you need to put a full stop on press enter and take a break, because your reader will need to take a breath as well. So that's one. And the other one is, the third one is to get someone else to read it. So it could be, a family member, a friend. And it's certainly something I do all the time, get someone else to read it. And people will give you feedback. Yeah.
I love how practical this is. I absolutely love it. And I totally get that when you're reading it like, and we're going. Okay, so well, how do you break that up? And I love what you said about having our clients get and find what it is they're looking for, having them understand and take action. All that is essential to the business owners who are listening here today, who want to get more clients or want to keep their clients or have them move forward in the sales process. Now, obviously, communicating big changes like the policy around the policy changes and the policy price rise is important, and a one way to use plain language. And one of the benefits is to actually get your message. But what are some of the other big benefits of communicating in this plain language?
Well, if we're thinking it, let's think about small organizations, and they might be promoting a webinar or a course or a membership or something like that. What will usually happen, in my experience, is that you might receive an email about that as a member, and you might look at it and glance at it and think, oh, yeah, that could be interesting. I'll come back to it. So very few people take it all in at once. So when they come back to it, first of all, they need to find it in the email. And the second thing is they need to find the text the relevant text in the email itself. So if you want to do that, so there might be something like, what date is it? What time zone is it? How much does it cost? All those kind of practical kind of things that we need to know. Because you've got the idea that you want to do it. You just want to see if it's practical for you right now. That's kind of a scenario I'm thinking of. And I've got 3 tips for that. So the first is put important information to the reader at the beginning. Important to the reader at the beginning. First one. Second thing is, otherwise, put things in the place people expect to find them. So you usually expect to find the phone number and the email address maybe at the top and the bottom. You don't expect them to be in the middle of a third paragraph. They're just not going to see that there. They're going to come back, see, Oh, I might call them. And the third one to help people find things is white space. And white space is one of the most important concepts in plain language. We talk about it all the time. And so it's not just about the words, it's to do with the space between the paragraphs, so you can easily see what's there.
Oh, that is so good.
If someone's wanting to do that, and maybe, if you promoted something and you got the people opened your emails, but not as many people registered, it's really do a plain language edit on the next one and to see whether it does those things. Is the information people want is that at the beginning. And if you can't put everything at the beginning, make sure you've got white space between the rest so they can.
I was looking at an email the other day that was about an event that was on a particular date, particular time, but all that information was buried inside of a very long sentence. So to your point, they could have just pulled that out and say, date, date, time, time, place, and just made it and left some white space around it. And that would make all the difference to the legibility. So good. Now we mentioned earlier that your specialty is in communicating with people over 55, and you've got a specific use case for plain language and how it relates to institutions, larger institutions like banks and insurers, and how they speak to old people. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and some of the mistakes that you see being made with older audiences?
Definitely. So a particular testing that we've done has been for superannuation funds, and they are wanting their pre-retiree market to convert to their pension product. That's what they want to do. And an awful lot of people in their 60s are actually ignoring them and doing their own thing. So it's actually a very difficult message to convey to people. But one of the things that gets in their way is that a lot of younger people misunderstand older people. So even if you think about, I might say 60 plus. Now 60 plus is like 40 years. There's
Right.
It's like 20 to 60, 40 to 100. There's a big difference. And if someone who's writing to that market, and this is a big thing that I see a lot, they'll make an assumption that age group is all the same. And for some reason, the picture they have in their head of the 60 plus is not someone who's 60 or 61, it's someone who's 80 or 81, which is fine. I mean, we want to communicate to them as well. But what it means is that they'll say things like, well, they don't use technology, or they're slow and they don't really understand things. And it is true, in that age group, there are people who don't use technology, but it's definitely not true of everyone. So it's this, there is this real sense from people marketing to this age group that they just don't really know who they're talking to.
This is so important, and quite often here on the show, we talk about understanding your ideal client and creating an ideal client avatar and getting very specific around the age. And sometimes the mistake we see people make is they say like women 35 plus. Now, a woman who's 35 who might have, younger children is very different to a woman 35 plus who's 55, who perhaps is an empty nester, is very different to a 75. They're all 35 plus. And so to your point, getting really specific around those ages of our ideal clients and who we are speaking to, because the examples you use, the case studies you use, what you craft inside of your landing pages and your emails and your advertisements, they're all going to want to reflect that you really understand and are speaking in plain language to that specific ideal client. Thank you, Sue. Terrific.
I do love hearing about the work you do, and it's been great hearing about the use case for plain language for, say, people 65, 75, 85, and so on. What I want to talk to you a bit now is maybe some examples where we can really see where this plain language has made a significant impact, whether it's in your industry or other industries. But can you share some kind of before and after scenarios where before it was not plain language and these were the results, and then after, once this plain language edit had been done, or once you'd done your great work to really make it more plain language, like there'd been a big turnaround? Can you give us some sense of what that's like?
The usual turnaround is that before the plain language edit, There'll be the organization has probably spent years sending out the same kind of letters, the same kind of statements. They've been doing it for a long time. And what they've had to do is resource up their call center, because when you send out unclear information with technical language people don't understand, or information buried in paragraph 3, people will call the call center. And call centers are very expensive resources for organizations. So they don't want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. And so what they see, I can't cite numbers, unfortunately, but what they see is a big drop in calls to the call center once the plain language version has gone out, because people have generally read more of it. They have read more of it, and it has used simpler language, so they've understood more of it. That's the big thing that happens. I do have an example of one that we changed for a particular superannuation fund. And just to give you a sense of what the difference is between a non-plain version and a plain version. So we found this in a letter in a superannuation fund. And this is how it goes. I've got to read it. Notwithstanding the fact that we did not handle your claim as well as we could, by way of explanation, we wish to advise that the 2 most important priorities for us, takes breath, in relation to early release are to pay members' claims as quickly as possible and to keep members super safe from fraud.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. It has 53 words in it, and plain language guidance is 20.
Wow. And
the other thing about it, that last point about keeping members super safe from fraud is really, really important.
Right.
It's a big strategy, initiative that a lot of people have at the moment, but it's buried. I mean, you've lost energy by the time you get to word number 40, basically. So what we did was to write it like this. We acknowledge that we did not handle your claim as well as we could. The 2 most important priorities for us are to pay members' claims as quickly as possible and to keep members super safe from fraud.
So much better.
Succinct. Yeah.
So, yeah. And so all the waffly words went. Notwithstanding, we advise that all of the waffle. So that's what you would do in a plain language edit if you tend to lean towards a verbose, fairly formal style in your writing. When you do a plain language edit, is to think about, well, if we take those words out, it would still mean the same, and it's going to be easier for someone's brain to process.
I love this so much. And, I know Suzi and I, we give a lot of feedback all the time to people's marketing. And, without necessarily knowing that we're using this plain language edit, a lot of the things you're saying here are so resonating with, I think, both of us about, like, strip all that flowery language away. More is not more. I think people think they've got to have the notwithstandings and the complicated phrases and things in there to sound like they know what they're talking about. But actually what it does is the opposite, right? It makes them sound like, I can't understand what you are saying to me in this, mire of words that you've put me inside of.
It can either be that you've just buried in their words and you don't get whatever it is they're trying to tell you. Or sometimes, as in that financial well-being example, it's almost like they didn't want to tell me the truth, and they were trying to waffle their way around before getting to the point. And the thing is, eventually you have to get to the point. So
yeah. I think plain language really builds a lot of trust. And when we're talking about marketing and communications, trust is so key and so central. And so I wondered if we can kind of take what you've been speaking about maybe and apply it to content marketing and communications and the kinds of things that people would be listening to this show to learn more about. What are some key areas within those fields, within our marketing, within our messaging, where we can really benefit from using plain language?
I think we can benefit from plain language all the time. Perhaps one of the weaknesses that many people writing content will share is they'll want to talk about themselves because they love what they do.
Right.
I do this. I know lots of other people who do it. And so what plain language can do, if you think about things, I know I'm going to make this plain, is to think, have I talked about myself too much and too early. That's, you know, that's one of the ways in which I think that content writers, especially if you're writing content and it's not your day job. So if it's something you always, you know, you got other things you do, but you like to write and you love what you're doing, there is a tendency just to talk a lot about it. In plain language, you'll say, you're fine. Don't do it at first. Put headings in there so people can skip it if they want to. Use bullet points so they can get it quickly. Use white space so people can process what you're saying.
Really, really great rules to live by. And I'm just, in my mind's eye, I'm seeing emails, I'm seeing web pages, I'm seeing lead magnets, I'm seeing all that application for our content marketers, where everything we've said here today will totally apply. Even writing your scripts or what you're doing on a reel, all those things. And so you gave us the wonderful example earlier of organizations creating big buckets of people like over 55, and everyone in there is in that older category. So that's a mistake, obviously, that those organizations were making. What are some of the other common mistakes that companies make, or small businesses make more specifically, when they're trying to implement plain language in their communications? Like you've mentioned, talking too much about themselves. Are there other mistakes that you see?
There's one which it's hard to know whether it's a mistake or whether it's just, well, it's a challenge. With the big companies and maybe the small ones, there's often a difference of opinion between marketing and legal. Marketing and professional writers will know what they want to say. They will know these rules, usually. But legal will want to say it in the way legal are used to saying things. And they'll want to use the legal terminology. They'll want to use long phrases, long sentences, long paragraphs. And so that is one of the big challenges. And I know that the kind of user testing that we do is practical for the large companies. It's not really practical for someone small. But if a small organization is facing that dilemma, they have someone who's saying, no, you know, you have to do it this way. Just any kind of testing, as much as you can, to illustrate what happens when you make people. Well, you can't make people read legal language. They'll just skip it and skim it and not get the message at all. So probably that's the one that comes most to my mind.
When I think about some people who might be in industries where perhaps the industry language can be quite technical, or maybe they are a lawyer or an accountant, and so the industry tends to speak in a particular language, and I'll talk about jargon separately. I think one of the mistakes that I see is that they feel that they need to sound like their profession. And I believe, and I think this is what you're saying, is if we just make it plain language that everybody gets and understands, it doesn't mean it's dumbing it down. It just means that you are going to get more people understanding. But the moment we start to use professional talk or our industry jargon, I think we can really lose people and really miscommunicate.
Yes, we lose people. That's the problem. They just don't read it. So if you think about the example that I gave you, changing the notwithstanding one into something else, that wasn't dumbed down. That was just clearer. It is sometimes necessary, depending on what you're doing, to use a jargon term, you know, because you might need to communicate something. But the rule is define it. So if you have to use a jargon term, you define it and say, by whatever, we mean X. And it's much better in that context to define it near where you said it. If you
I love that. We do that here on the show sometimes. Like we will say an MVP or a CTA or whatever, and then we'll stop and we'll go, a CTA is a call to action, and it's not dumbing it down. It just means, and I'm now including people for whom this isn't plain language, you know, whereas inside of our mastermind, where women are working with us day in, day out, and we're talking marketing language all the time, I may not need to make those little explanations, but certainly we want to, you know, the thing about communication is to be understood. Otherwise it's not communication if it doesn't land. Exactly. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, I agree completely. And this idea of losing people, I mean, I know I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but when we are, particularly in the area of content marketing, where the content we are putting out there is specifically designed to get someone to take the next step with us so that they will buy from us, the very worst thing we can be doing is losing people. And so I love the way you're coming at this. We've talked about different conversion tactics, how to get more conversions, how to get more people buying from us. And this to me is such a powerful conversion tactic, to speak in plain English so we lose fewer people. We get more people understanding the gist of what we're saying and knowing what to do next and then moving forward with us. So I love that you've demonstrated this for us. Sue, is there anything else that you would like to add? Any other points that we haven't covered yet that you feel like, I really want the Content Sales listeners to know this?
Don't give up. It can be difficult to, if you've spent, I know, a couple of decades as a corporate something or in business, and you've been writing a certain way and your colleagues write that way and your industry writes that way, it's not an instant thing to just stop that and start writing a different way. So practice it, keep going, and I know quite a lot of people in the plain language community, and they don't get it right the first time they write. They don't. They have to work at it, and they have to read it to yourself, check yourself all the time, and it will eventually you start to notice when other people do it. And once you've started noticing when other people do it, you're then more sensitized to noticing when you do it.
Very good.
Such good advice. Now, Sue, I know we've got some information you're going to share with our listeners, which we'll talk about in just a minute, but how can people find you and get in touch with you if they want to just read more of your brilliance or stay in touch with you?
I live on LinkedIn, actually, pretty much. So I can be found on LinkedIn as Susan Bell Research. So I'm there. There's a QR code on the download as well for that. And my website is www.sbresearch.com.au, which also has lots of information about plain language and about the older market and user testing.
And of course, if you want to do a research project, Sue is your person. We do have that free download from you, Sue, and we will give everyone a link to that in just a moment. But could you tell us what they can expect from that? Is it a report? Guide?
No, it's
what is it?
It's a couple of pages.
Right.
It describes the framework, get, find, understand, and use. And there's I think 3 tips for each one, some of which I've already covered today.
Absolutely. So it's a great recap. We're going to give you the details of that in just a moment. In the meantime, thank you, Sue. We so appreciate you being on the show and sharing your expertise with us here today. It's been wonderful.
It's been a pleasure and an opportunity. So thank you very, very much.
Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Absolutely loved it.
Agree. I mean, we knew Sue was brilliant just from how she shows up inside the mastermind, but it's so great. I think for me, it was so great to dig even deeper into her content and just see just how much depth there is.
Yeah, I felt really privileged actually, because this is the work that she charges a lot of money to do with clients and sharing that with us. And I know she's worked with a couple of the other, helping some women in our mastermind as well. But it's just such a good reminder, because I know for me, and I write some, is that it can be easy to think, to not do the edit, to just, write. And it gets long and long-winded, and it doesn't need to be. And so one of the takeaways that I got is that just go for it, do that first draft, but then do the plain language edit. So I'm really keen to see her download and have on tap those little tips that she has, and knowing that it won't take away from the meaning, that I can probably say what I want to say in fewer words. And with that, adding the white space. And that's both visually, but also metaphorically, like, add some white space to our communications rather than feeling we have to drown our reader in our brilliance.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I know just because we do a lot of work together and I see what we're both recommending to people that ask us for advice, we're often saying more white space. Take this content you've got on one page and spread it over like pictures, or make more space on the landing page for this. So I couldn't agree with you more about that white space, giving things room to breathe. And, I think about that quote, I'd have written you a shorter note, but I ran out of time. I think what Sue's showing us today is this plain language edit that you were speaking about, Suzi, as one of your key takeaways, was also one of mine, that, it's really respecting our reader, respecting our respecting our audience, that we will take the time as a friend of ours, mutual friend of ours, Ryan Levesque, says, to get to the simplicity on the far side of complexity. And I think that's what she was really showing us today. I also love just understanding that plain language is so much more than just what the words we write. You know, it's kind of what you're touching on there with the white space. It's about the layout. It's about the design. It's about the order in which we present the information. And all of these things really are so fundamental. They make such a huge difference. You can be saying the best words, you can have the best, but if you're not observing this idea of simple language in a good layout and design in the right order, you are going to be wasting so many opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the models. I love a good framework. And I really loved how Sue was talking about that our clients hop, skip, and jump around our communications. And so we don't want them to jump off the page, off the website page, out of our ebook, out of our email. So how do we make it so that they're finding what they need, that they're understanding it, that if they come back, they can still find it. Like if they do have to jump off because, you know, the dog is barking or someone's at the door or whatever, they have to go to an appointment, that they can come back and then they can find what it is that they need. And I love that hop, skip, jump model.
Yeah, and it really touches on a couple of things you were saying there about the other model she talked about, which was those kind of the standard, really, the 4 elements of plain language, you know, get, find, understand, and use. Can the reader get the info at the time they need it? Can they find the information kind of where they're expecting to find it? Do they understand it when they find it? And then can they use it once they've understood it? And I think, gosh, if we just applied that to absolutely every piece of communication, we'd see an up-leveling across the board.
Yeah. And we know Sue pretty well because she's part of our mastermind. So we knew about the work that she was doing with organizations and retirees and her frustration and seeing how badly some organizations are communicating with their audience because, you know, if you're over 55, then you're old. And that's just not true. Like a 55-year-old is not a 55-year-old, is not a 65, is not a 75. And so it does go back to what we talk about a lot on this show, which is really understanding your ideal client and reflecting them in your words, in your images, in the style of communication, and not making broad brush things like old people don't use technology. Yeah, there may be a sway towards that, but if you're bundling, if you're not being niche enough, so if you're working with, you know, mums, what does that mean? Are they mums of newborns? Are they mums of, you know, kindy children? Are they mums of adult children? Getting really specific, and that's going to help you with the plain language because you're going to know what to say to those people because it's different depending on which niche you've chosen.
Yes, and there's a phrase that, just to pick up on what you're saying there, one of the takeaways I wrote down was a phrase Sue said, which was, if you want your users to understand you, you need to understand your users. Just thought that was so well put. I know that's a very common theme of this show and of all successful marketing and of all successful communication, but she's put it in such a very plain speaking, dare I say, clear, portable way that, yeah, I can't just, it's not a one-sided thing. I can't just expect them to understand me if I haven't taken the time first to understand them. And we've got tons of episodes here in the show dating way back to some of our earlier episodes about how to do client interviews and how to kind of document your ideal client avatar and have them really be someone specific, like you were saying, Suzi. So we will include a couple of sort of companion episodes to this one. For anyone that's listening to this going, you know what, I really do want to do a bit more work on understanding my audience. Maybe that is where I need to begin because they're not understanding me right now with the messaging I'm putting out. Maybe the onus is on me to do some more depth understanding of them.
And there's one more thing we discussed with Sue that I do want to say, and that is the thing of jargon. And jargon isn't just using terms that are relative to your industry. It's also, and this is something that, you know, Michelle, drives me mad, is when people think, grab onto sort of this group think, and they're using terminology that is jargon perhaps amongst coaches or amongst healers or people in your industry. It might not be industry language, but the way that you're speaking, you want to be understood by people who don't yet speak the same language as you. And I know that when we are talking about marketing, it could be very easy for us to start using a whole lot of advanced marketing terms because that's the world in which Michelle and I live in. But whether it's in our mastermind or in some of the courses we do, or even on this podcast, we do want to try and make it understood. And so just watch out for the jargon. And the best way to know if you're using jargon is give it to someone who's totally removed from what you do and have them read it and see, do they get it? Can they find what they're looking for? Does it make sense to them? That is what I want to say about that. We're going to give you some companion episodes. We mentioned some other things here today. We've got the great download from Sue. We're going to put all of that over on our show notes page, which you're going to find at herbusiness.com/plain language. That's PLAIN language. Thank you again to Sue. Before we go, we love to share these tips and inspire you to up-level your content marketing. And we want to let more and more women know about this show. So you would be doing us a huge favor if you popped across to Apple Podcasts and left us a rating or a review. So if you enjoyed this episode or any episode of the show, if you would do that, we would absolutely love it. One of our regular listeners and at least one-time guest here on the show is Belinda Weaver of Copyright Matters. She is based in California. She helps copywriters create businesses they love to work in. And whether you're an aspiring copywriter or you're writing for your business, she has courses and coaching and all sorts of things that can help you. You'll find her at copyrightmatters.com. She was listening to episode 228, where we talked about how to offer a VIP option for your online course. And she actually did an Instagram reel with an image of the album art from our show and a comment to say, I've added a morning walk to my schedule and today I'm digging into content sales. Always so useful. And I messaged her at the time and said, oh, tell us what you enjoyed. And she said, I got some great new ideas for my next membership launch coaching week. I'm going to add a VIP level with some implementation support zones during the week. So really, really taking the information and using it. Thank you, Belinda. You are a rock star. Michelle.
Suzi.
What do we have coming up in the next episode?
Oh, we've got a really, really wonderful episode coming up. It is called How to Find Your Core Message and Purpose. And it's with a special guest that we have joining us on the show, Erin Weed. And she's someone I've had the great pleasure to know. I've done some of the process that she'll be sharing on this particular episode. This is a person that has helped people craft amazing TED Talks. She's built massive communities. She is a real, she's kind of a genius in this space. And so this is something we can all benefit from as content marketers, really getting clearer and clearer and clearer on our core message and understanding more deeply the purpose of our work and getting very specific about the outcomes that we're seeking to bring into the world and through our businesses. So that's How to Find Your Core Message and Purpose with the wonderful Erin Weed, and that's coming up in our next episode.
So if you don't already subscribe to the show, please go ahead and click that subscribe button wherever you are listening, and that episode will be out in just 2 weeks from the release of this episode. We are publishing new episodes, juicy new episodes every 2 weeks. Michelle, anything you want to say before we go today?
Another very, very special thanks to Suzi. Each of the women in our mastermind group, both Suzi and I, they hold such a special place in our hearts. And it's such a privilege to get to work with them, but also to share their brilliance with others. So this feels especially a sweet one today.
Yeah, so good. Thank you again, Sue. And once again, we'll put the details where you can get in touch with Sue, whether it's for research that you want to do or simply to get a hold of the free download she provided. Go to herbusiness.com/plain language, and that's PLAIN language. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time right here on the Content Sales Podcast. Bye for now.